Hi, my name is Hannah Bookbinder, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Hannah, thanks so much for taking the time to join me for a productive conversation today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, Mike.
So, I am currently looking at the book, which I'm flipping back Unlock Your Inner Superhero Conquering Challenges of ADHD. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the app because one thing that I've come across in my years of working in this space before I was writing exclusively about productivity. Many who listen know that I wrote for the Cult of Mac and I wrote for the Next Web, and I was looking at apps consistently. And there is an allure of apps out towards apps, right? And a lot of people when they take on apps, either as developing them or even just using them, they think of them as, well, this will solve all my problems. The app will take care of the work. So, first off, let's talk a little bit about the app off the top, and then what your thoughts are around how the app works in tandem with the work that you've done, not just in this book, but also in your work in general.
So I'll sort of work backwards, and my work has informed the book as well as the app. I use the strategies and the tools that I know for a fact work in my practice because my in-person interactions have demonstrated that they're effective. So the app is called My Toad app, TOAD, and Toad stands for time management, organization, accountability, and dialing in. And I wanted to have something that was catchy and got people's attention and was easy to remember. And on the other hand, I chose the Toad because just like people who are struggling to, master a new skill set, we start off in this beginning stage. For the toads, it's the eggs, and they're slimy, and then they develop into these cute little roly-poly tadpoles. So you're making progress, and then you finish off with this final product, which is your productivity, or a toad that is just so ugly, he or she is cute, and you can't resist him. So, I always like to have some symbolism and metaphor and a lot of the things that I do. And what is great about the app is the fact that people who are neurodivergent, whether they have an official diagnosis of ADHD or not, they do much better when they can work in a flow state as opposed to being interrupted by various things, whether it's a distraction with a colleague coming into your office, or if it's a kid who's pulling your attention away from your desk, or it's texts or whatever from your friends who are dialing in. And I wanted to have a closed system, if you will, in which you can have all of the support that you need within this app. If you're working on your time management because you're experiencing time blindness, you're late with your deadlines, be it for your boss or for school or what have you, everything in between, then you can, tap into that suite of tools. If you're somebody who is disorganized, you're constantly losing things, you can't like control or organize your thought process, then the suite of tools that offers organizational suggestions is there. If you're somebody who just can't follow through on what your plans are, then there's the accountability. And that's both for self accountability as well as accountability to others, because that's an issue.
Right.
And it's also difficult to sometimes to rein in your busy mind. So being able to dial in was something that I wanted to focus on as well. And since you can't end an acronym with TOAF, of TOAF, I decided to use dialing in instead.
The first thing I thought when I got the email about, like, hey, are you? Let's have a conversation, was when I saw My Toad. I'm like, oh, it's Eat the Frog. Like, there's a correlation there. You did. I'm sure that came across when you were like, that must have come across your mind when you were putting the acronym together as well. It's like, oh, there's a. Now, interestingly, we've had Brian Tracy on the show before. Eat That Frog doesn't always work for people, especially those with ADHD. Can we talk a little bit about that in particular? Because that common advice that we hear, tackle the hardest thing first, all those conventional, quote, productivity and time management tactics. They don't, when it comes to neurodivergent people, they have maybe a trickier time with it, or they can't take those at face value, right?
There needs to be something, regardless of what it is, whether it's the most difficult thing or whether it's something that's easier. There has to be a bit of nuance and intrigue, something that's going to excite them, kick off that dopamine hit so that they can say, okay, I've got the energy. I can do this. And very often, what I do is I will customize my advice based on the individual. And that can vary also by time of day or in any given week. If something is particular, if a student or a client is particularly stressed or troubled by something, then engaging in any kind of activity is probably going to be challenging. So that concept of eating the frog and getting the hardest thing done first is sometimes equivalent to climbing, Fuji Mountain.
Right.
So we also talk about greasing the wheel. What little bit can you break off and chip away at first to see that you can sort of start the process, gain some traction, and then move on to something that's a little bit more, energy necessary. So you really have to be cognizant of yourself. If you're working with somebody who is neurodivergent or anybody in general, you have to be aware of the nuances of the person so that you can help them appropriately.
I think to me, one of the things that I've come across is it seems like it's a moving target too, right? Like
Yes.
that is, so when I share my work with those who have some kind of neurodivergent, elements to them, whether it's ADHD or something else, um, you know, they often say this worked for a little while, or this only
Mhm.
works, like you pointed out, at this time of day, or what have you. So that's got to be frustrating when it's so. How do those with ADHD cope with this understanding and awareness? Because you talk about awareness and the idea of awareness, from awareness to action. How do you help someone that is saying, "Look, I'm so tired," or "This is a moving target," and how do I navigate that?
So it's sort of like what I did with my app. We have an AI informed tool called the How To tool, and TJ is our point toad, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions that TJ asks the user is, "How are you feeling today? What are the challenges that you are facing?" Or you can do a general chat with TJ. And that's kind of the same approach that you need to do when you're doing your work or you're engaging or embarking on any kind of task that you need to do. How am I feeling in this moment? How much brain capacity, how much energy do I have? Is there something else that's pulling me away from this? And if you can kind of get into that regular practice, that helps to set you up for success, because obviously if you just had a fight with your significant other, or you were up all night last night because your kid was barfing, or whatever it is, or you have like many, many things that you have to tend to on your stovetop, then you are probably less likely to be productive and motivated that day because you're already spent to begin with. On the other hand, if you've been productive all day and you're just like in this mode of productivity, you could be continuing that trajectory too. So, every person and their personality is different. There are some people who, I've met physicians who, because they're on call a lot, they thrive on less sleep. All they need to do is have a cup of coffee and they're ready to go.
Mm.
On the other hand, if you have a parent who has been staying home or is an executive and doesn't have that kind of lifestyle and needs to have their sleep, then on those days when they're sleep deprived, they're less likely to be able to start to engage. So you constantly have to be in the habit of taking your pulse and checking in and saying, okay, what's my status right now? Because it can change between now and later.
How valuable do you think is journaling throughout this process too? Because it sounds to me that you even for me, like the reliability factor of knowing what to do when those kind of things happen, to have a reference point of like, oh, this is what Mike did, 3 months ago or 2 weeks ago or what have you. First off, do you think journaling is an incredible aid for this? And do you practice that as well?
So I have intermittently, I have been a great journalist and I've been a terrible journalist.
Okay.
Depending on how tired I am, speaking of that status, I think that journaling can be very, very helpful to help you reflect on the day and what stood out to you. What I do when it comes to my advice about journaling is to kind of make it user friendly. There are some people who could sit down and write pages and pages and pages about something, and they just become hyper focused, which is what some people who are neurodivergent are known to be able to do, particularly if it's something that's of interest to them. But for other people, writing is very, very painful. So we will talk about, okay, let's bring this down to something that's really doable. What are three things that you were particularly proud of? What are three things that really irritated you that day? And then that's their journaling. And they can bullet point it. You can do bullet journaling as well. So, it again, journaling, amazing tool. It has to be utilized in a way that's appropriate for the user.
I want to talk about them. You talked about metaphors and nuance and stuff like that. And the thing that came to me as I was going through the book was, unlocking your superpowers, like the superhero metaphor. And what I appreciated was that you didn't frame any kind of ADHD or attention issues as the villain. And I think that can short circuit success, right? Because I've come across several people who almost look at it that way, like it's this villain that they have to conquer.
Yeah.
How important was it for you to kind of say, well, first off, use that metaphor? Because I mean, if anyone sees it, like they can see the Green Lantern pillow behind me. Like I'm a big fan of, like, I'm a geek, right? So I love the Green Lantern. I love Moon Knight. I mean, before we hit record, I talked about how my son and I went to New Jersey Devils game where it was Marvel Superheroes Night. So I mean,
Right.
I love that concept, and that use. So how important was it for you to, like, first off, going down the path of using that as a metaphor, and then making sure that framing of, you're not fighting this thing. This is not the enemy. In fact, if anything, it's almost like that complicated relationship that Superman can have with Lex Luthor sometimes, where they've had to team up to defeat a larger enemy, which might be in this case a to-do list or something like that.
Right, exactly. So, and I want to preface my response to you, Mike, with this idea because, one of my colleagues in the field, Sasha Hamdani, has mentioned that people have naively stated that having ADHD is like having a superpower. And I don't view it that way. There's a very fine line between that and how I view ADHD, and that is that we all have, I'm using another metaphor, we all have baggage that we carry around with us.
Mm-hmm.
On some days it's the size of a wallet, and some days it's more of a backpack carry-on type of size, and some days we have a full set of luggage and we just are completely overwhelmed by what's going on. And the whole idea is to, within reason, keep it between a wallet and a carry on size by tapping into what you bring to the table, because we all bring strengths. And that's where the difference is. I think that no matter what each of us is facing on any given day, because of our personality, because of our abilities or inabilities, we all have something that's redeeming about us. And with the work that I've done based on the past 30 years of my being in practice, almost 30 years, um, I have found a lot of people who have ADHD or who are struggling with executive functioning skills to be some of the most resourceful individuals that I've met. They can look at a situation that maybe you or I would look at and say, okay, yeah, you just go ABC. And they will say, well, no, if you start with Z and then hit back to T and then hit A, it's much more, user friendly or whatever it is. And maybe it costs you an extra 5 or 10, 15 minutes to get from one point to the next, but it works. They're resilient because they know what it's like to live in a world that's not going to bend to them. And because of that same reason, they're also very compassionate. They can look at a situation and identify people in the room who maybe they have hearing aids, maybe they're asthmatic, whatever the disability is, if you will, for lack of a better word, is they know what it's like to live in this world, and that they've had to make accommodation for themselves and to advocate for themselves fiercely sometimes. And they're the first to reach out. So I think that all of those qualities are superhero powers, and
Yeah.
that's what makes them superheroes to me.
Well, and I think, this may seem a bit, off as a bit of a side quest, but I'm a left-handed person. So,
So much.
right. So we had to learn, like,
No,
there were,
left, not right.
yeah, I mean, I remember in school where it's like there were two pairs of left-handed scissors in the classroom to share. And if there were more than two, like you had to either wait or you had to learn that if you flipped the right-handed pair upside down, and you could use it, it would work. But you had to figure that out. Like you had to navigate that. And it is interesting. I'm also a night owl. So again,
Mhm.
that circadian difference between, like, hey, well, that's why Eat That Frog would never work for me, because I'm like,
Right.
I'm not mentally prepared to do that stuff. But to have a conversation with you, I can do that, because not only am I, not having to create as much, I'm actually feeding off of the energy that you bring to the conversation. So, but after 1 o'clock, I'm like, leave me alone. Let me do my writing. Let me do the things I can do.
Right.
Whereas I think early risers, they can flip it a bit. Now, I mean, again, everyone's different. Some people like after 1 o'clock, leave me alone because I'm tired because I've been up since 5. So it really bugs me when there are ways that people say that this is the way we operate. This is the objective way to do something. Knowing full well that subjectively and this is where, the idea of anxiety can show up, the other A, right? Like, how do I, so do you find have you found in the work that you do that anxiety and ADHD often are bedfellows in a lot of ways?
They go hand in hand because for a whole variety of reasons. People who are neurodivergent, just like anybody else who's not considered normal, which I don't like that expression or that label, they're misunderstood. And they're viewed as they're defiant, they're difficult, they're lazy, they don't want to do anything except play video games. And that's not, we already discussed how that's not the case. And so when you are constantly fighting against that social perspective of who you are, that in and of itself can cause anxiety. Then you put on top of that the fact that you're being asked to do these tasks that are not nuanced, not interesting, not something that speaks to your spectrum of things that you feel passionately about, which is part of why I want to go back to something that you just said. You said that doing these interviews, you're feeding off of my energy, but you're also, based on the conversation that we had prior to recording, you strike me as somebody who is innately curious.
Yes.
So being able to ask questions and find out information about something intrigues you. So therefore, even if if we were doing this at 3 o'clock in the morning, my guess is that probably you could pull it together long enough to be able to do this because it's fascinating to you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there's the repercussions for disappointing people and not following through. Your boss is pissed off. Your parents are angry with you. You lost privileges to be able to drive and you were going to go out with your significant other because it's your anniversary for the first month. Whatever it is, there's all of this constant outside pressure that's taking place. And so, of course, you're going to have anxiety. And then the depression comes along with that as well.
Well, and shame, I would imagine too, right? Like,
Absolutely.
and I want to tie this in back to the app too, because I have found that. So here's what I do this. I put on my to-do list things that people are like, why would you need to do that? Like, shouldn't you do that automatically? I have things on my list like call mom. And it's a
Mhm.
recurring task on my to-do list. And people are like, well, wouldn't you just naturally do that? I'm like, maybe. Like, I can't trust that the pace of life will give me those moments where, because during a moment of rest or break, my brain, I'll probably like, oh, let's just watch TV, or let's just do this, or let's just go like, but that relationship is important to me, right? So I have it in there. Now, it doesn't mean, I think this is the other thing is, again, speaking of being subjective, if it's a recurring task on my list, it doesn't mean I do it that day. It's just bringing it to my attention so I can go, oh, right. Because when I'm working with somebody who is let's say they're using an app or they're using a bullet journal or whatever, and they're looking at their overdue, that shame that it's associated with them. Like, well, what if those are just attention dates? Like, those are when you want it brought to your attention so that then you can make a decision around it. And there is still this pull I find, and I face it too, but because again, that idea of like, well, shouldn't you just spend quality time with kids? Why is that on your list? Shouldn't you just do that automatically? Is that something that folks who especially those with ADHD face? And how do they combat, like, how do they get rid of that chatter from the outside, either internal that's saying, hey man, you should just do this automatically, why are you writing this down, or external factors going, hey, they either see people doing it and go, why don't I do that? Or they hear from somebody, well, why would you put that on your list? You should just do that automatically. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, so I think that I think you're asking me if people experience that who have ADHD.
Well, I think yes. And then how do they, for lack of it, as a like, let's use the superhero, how do they fight back? How do they have the will to resist this? Like, it's again that fear versus failure thing where it's like, I'm failing to no, like, just if somebody gives you crap for this, it's their thing, not yours. Like, how do they overcome that challenge consistently? Because I think it shows up ad hoc, right?
So, and the challenge is this outside chatter. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm thinking outside chatter. Internal chatter can help, but outside, because that's where the shame shows up. It's like somebody saying, oh, shouldn't you just do that? What's wrong
Right.
with you? And they're like, you're right. There must be something wrong with me, as opposed to, no, I do this because if I don't, it just won't happen.
Right. And I think that it's similar to, why doesn't a person who has asthma take an inhaler? Well, if I don't, then I'm going to pass out because I didn't get enough oxygen. Why
Right.
does a diabetic take their insulin? I mean, these are just components of what it is that somebody with this profile needs to do in order to be successful. So, yeah, it's very easy to fall into the trap of listening to the outside narrative that other people are creating for you. But if you can take a step away from that, close the window and shut the doors for a little bit and say, okay, look, is it kind of silly that I have to have a reminder to call my mom or, play with my kids? Maybe for somebody who doesn't have difficulty remembering and executing on these things, but this is something that I need. So I'm going to do it. It's like when you have parents or older students in college who are advocating for their kids to have accommodations in school. There are teachers who are going to push back and say, well, shouldn't he naturally be able to, focus long enough in class to be able to take a test? Well, no, he can't. So we need to accommodate that. And does it give him a leg up over the other kids? No. And the other piece of that too is, Mike, that a lot of the accommodations that are being asked for kids who have ADHD or struggle with executive functioning skills in the form of an IEP or a 504, a lot of those accommodations are going to help the general student population anyway, which is why it drives me crazy that it's not being brought into the classroom as a natural part of the course of the day anyway.
I've talked to teachers here in Canada who've said that, we need to focus more on teaching executive functioning stuff. We focus on some other stuff and then it doesn't get there. Things that they don't teach in school, they've started to a degree, but it's still not like how to manage your time and how to manage your money. Like those things don't come up naturally in curriculum. As a matter of fact, it's so funny that when now they've got some accommodations. I remember this happened a couple of years ago where we drove up to my daughter's middle school at the time, or it was my son's, one of the two, and they're like, I'm like, when does the bell ring? Oh, bells don't ring anymore. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, because they can startle people and there's some sensitivity around that. I'm like, okay, so what are they doing to help kids manage time now? Like to know that, okay, it's time to go to this next thing. Oh, the teachers just decide. I'm like, that's in the principle of that may be okay for some, but once once they're off to university, like, like those kind of things get thrown out the window. And,
Right.
You can't say to your kids, well, in the real world, because that immediately gives them this, there's this.
Right.
But I mean, it's interesting to me that those things aren't, and to your point, they would help everybody. Like they wouldn't just help, the kids that have these challenges or have these, diagnoses or what have you. what I love that you do in the book, by the way, which I think it kind of dovetails nicely from what we're talking about, is you have these stop points, which I think
Mhm.
they are signals, much like the school bell would be, much like, and it's not determined by the whim of the person at hand. Like, okay, it's time for me to go. You've said stop. Like, there's clear stop signs. How important was it for you to put those in there? And were you very strategic in like, I need to have so many, or I need to do it at this time? Like, how did you map that out? Because when I was reading, I'm like, okay, normally when I see exercises, it's like, here's the chapter, here's the summary of the chapter, and now do this exercise. Yours are like, oh wait, there's like a paragraph and another one. Like, I'm noticing it happening at what seems to be random cadences, like random spots. So I'd love for you to touch on that.
I did not set out to have a certain number of stop signs or, reflection points. Rather, I did it based on intuition. I wanted this book to be structured in such a way that it felt to the reader like they were sitting down and they were having a session with me. I wanted there to be a conversation that was going on. And there are points in a conversation that I have with my clients, in this case, the students, because that's who this book was created for,
Mm-hmm.
where we will talk about how they're feeling, possible causes for what they're feeling, and the problems that they're having. And then we'll talk about solutions. And then I will have that stopping reflection point to say to them, what do you think about this? What are your thoughts? What do you think are going to be the things that help you? What are going to be the things that hold you back? And because I'm not able to sit down with every single reader who's reading my book, I wanted to provide that opportunity for them. And there are key points in the book where I deliberately placed those stop points. Some might argue that I placed too many in there, but I didn't want to miss that opportunity for them to figure out how to own what's being presented to them. I didn't want this to be like a passive thing, because I know as an educator, if the kid is just going like this and reading through the material, whatever the material is, inevitably it's not going to stick with them, and it's not going to have personal meaning.
Yeah, and what you'll hear from people is, well, people love patterns, they love consistency, they love that. I'm like, yeah, but the consistency is the stop sign. Like, that's the pattern.
Right.
The pattern is, you see the stop sign, you stop. It doesn't matter how many times it shows up. That
Exactly.
there's plenty of music that is like 4/4 time, but then there's some that's like 7/4, and some that's 16. Like, so you can't necessarily say, okay, everything's got to be 4/4, everything's got to be, because first off, music would be boring if it was 4/4 time. Rush just announced that they're going back on tour, which I think is kind of cool, especially with a female drummer too. They've they got Neil Peart's family's blessing and all that stuff. So it's like,
That's
I think
awesome.
the joke I saw online, which is like, um, now that Rush is going back on tour with a female drummer, we can at least know that there'll be one woman at a Rush concert going,
Right.
which I thought was rather funny. As we get close to wrapping up, I want to find out, like, there's so much more we could talk about, rituals, and you list a series of resources at the end of the book, which I think people should go to. But you've also got the app, and I want to talk about what's next, not just for the app, but for what's your broader mission as things move forward for you and your work.
So my broader mission, which we're acting on right now, is to go beyond the scope of helping individual users, but to bring the app and the book to places like university athletic departments and the learning support centers. And the same thing for the high schools. Really presenting this book, for example, to parents and teachers and coaches has been very helpful, because it gives them some insight into what it's like for these kids to live day to day with these challenges. And it's therefore then informed how they can change how they're interacting with their kids, because the kid's not doing it because he or she wants to be difficult. They're doing it because it just is not something that they're wired to do. And so let's change the perspective a little bit so that you can change your game plan. We're bringing the app to businesses, because if you want to have a better bottom dollar or bottom line, then you need to have productive employees. And we've brought it to multiple pediatricians, developmental pediatricians. We've brought it to women's health providers, because women, they experience fluctuations in hormones, and hormones can wreak havoc on executive functioning skills under the best of circumstances.
Mm.
So this tool is very far reaching as far as its application to multiple demographics. And that's what our next phase is.
Well, Hannah, again, I'd love to have you back on to talk a bit more about this, but I want to be respectful of your time and the listeners' time. So before we wrap up, where can people get the app, check out the book, and keep up with the work that you're doing?
So you can get more information about the book and the app at www.mytoadapp.com. You can get it. The app is available right now on Apple, and we're also working on the Android and a laptop version so that we can bring it into the schools. And you can also shoot me an email at my email address. It's located on the website. And to learn more about my private practice, they can go to www.academically.com. That's the word academic followed by the hyphen sign. And then ally is ALLY.com.
Hannah, thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it, Mike.